because the offender's level of retained responsibility was low, and in circumstances where the offending would not have taken place but for the offender's schizophrenia, the judge was entitled to conclude that a penal element was unnecessary. This was so despite the number of victims and despite the extent of the harm caused. The schizophrenia was the sole identified cause of these crimes. So, for example, there was no evidence of substance abuse, no evidence of any culpable failure to take medication, or any motive for attacking these victims. The key factor in a case like this, when deciding whether or not a penal element is required, is the strength of the link between the offender's impairment and the offending in question. Here, at the time of the assaults, the offender was in the grip of a severe psychotic episode. The judge properly took into account the different regimes that would apply, depending on which of the two possible sentences was imposed. His conclusion that hospital orders with restrictions were appropriate was consistent with the principle that the graver the offence and the greater the risk to the public, the greater the emphasis that should be placed on the protection of the public. He reached the reasonable conclusion, based on the psychiatric evidence before him, that the aim of public protection would better be served by hospital with restrictions orders. In any event, the extreme violence perpetrated by the offender makes it very likely that, whichever of the two options had been adopted, the offender will spend the rest of his life in a secure hospital. Our conclusion. There was no error in the approach adopted by the judge. The sentences imposed were not arguably unduly lenient. Leave to refer the sentences is refused. It is impossible to read of the circumstances of this offending without the greatest possible sympathy for the victims of these terrible attacks and their families and their friends. The victim impact statements paint a graphic picture of the appalling effects of the offender's conduct. Had the offender not suffered the mental condition that he did, the sentencing judge would doubtless have been considering a whole life term of imprisonment. But neither the judge nor this court can ignore the medical evidence as to the offender's condition, which led to these dreadful events, or the threat to public safety which the offender continues to pose. Thank you very much.